place and went to Tyre and Sidon. Those are Phoenician cities, like we said before, and they are in southern Lebanon. Interesting, huh? So Jesus had just made a statement about what was pure and what was impure. And then he goes to this like totally Gentile place. And by doing that, he's pretty much like acting out what he'd already explained in his words. He led his disciples to a place that was considered unclean. You think the Pharisees were upset they didn't wash their hands. Can you imagine how upset they were when he says, "You're going there"? That's like totally unclean. I mean, he's clearly making a point here. In 22, so then the Canaanite woman from the region comes out and starts shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." So Matthew makes this clear that this woman is not Jewish. She's a Canaanite. The translation of the word in our Bible is shouted. I think it's shouted. Yeah, started shouting. Okay, started shouting. The Greek word in the original language is krazo. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it doesn't just mean talking loudly like shouting does. It has more of a notion of crying out, like a desperate appeal, just desperately crying out. And other places that word is used, like the disciples cried out in fear when they saw Jesus walking on the water, right? So it's like somebody who's in great need and maybe a great deal of pain too. Even Jesus, the Bible said he cried out in that way when he was on the cross. So this isn't just shouting. That's the problem with translations. We don't always get the full meaning. So the woman cried out for mercy. She's asking Jesus to see her troubles and to have pity on her. And then she named Jesus Son of David. This is a messianic title. She is saying Jesus is the Messiah. Now, Jesus was not a Messiah to the Phoenicians. I mean, I'm pretty sure they still worship Baal. So this Gentile woman, I mean, she understood who Jesus was better than the scribes and Pharisees who'd been studying the Old Testament prophecies all of their lives. Think about that. Think about what it says, too, about Jesus's opinion of women back then, that there are so many stories where women have a greater understanding of who Jesus is and what God's message is than would be expected for their roles at that time. So, and he points out that even like the disciples they hadn't said he was the Messiah yet. They don't say that till the next chapter, and not until Jesus specifically says, "Who do you say that I am?" So this woman said Jesus was the Messiah of Israel. And she also made it clear that he would reign over the whole earth, that the healing and salvation that he brought would eventually come to all. So then she's begging Jesus on behalf of her daughter, clearly believing that he had the power to cast out the evil that was harming her child. So verse 23, he didn't answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us. Get her rid of her. She's bugging us." So we expect Jesus to immediately help this woman. That's what Jesus did. He didn't say a word, so that seems weird. Was it a test of the woman, or was it a test of the disciples? We assumed that they had heard what he'd said about the pure and the impure. Had they grasped that idea of who was pure and who was impure and what made a person pure and what made a person impure? Had they understood that God looks at the heart, not at the outward, things, stuff? So if this was a test of the disciples, they failed pretty miserably, right? I mean, she's shouting out and they get uncomfortable. So instead of seeing her pain and feeling compassion, like Jesus has been teaching him to do, they saw her as a pain in the rear end and wanted to get rid of her. Verse 24, he answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Jesus seems to be playing into this sense of division that the disciples felt. Yeah, he was definitely sent to the lost sheep of Israel. I mean, that was true. And really, Jesus had given the Jews every chance to return to God by accepting Jesus as the Messiah before he started going to the Gentiles. But we had just seen the lost sheep of Israel in the form of the Pharisees and the scribes, and they seemed determined to stay lost. They did not want to believe in Jesus. So these words of Jesus may be more like a question, or maybe an ironic statement. In verse 25, she came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, help me." Can you hear the pleading desperation in her voice? And think about this. When the Pharisees and the scribes come to Jesus, they're not worshiping him. She was kneeling down worshiping him. They said an act of obeisance. I'm not even 100% sure what that word means, but I think it means like worship, like, or saying you're better than me, I honor you, or whatever, like that. So it's huge contrast with the way the Pharisees and the scribes were. And she calls him Lord, not Rabbi, which is a higher title than Rabbi. In 26, he answers, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." What? This sounds really harsh. He's basically comparing her to a dog. And dogs back then were considered really unclean. Dogs, like, they ate the food that humans wouldn't eat, and they licked the blood of the dead. I mean, it's pretty gross. But so we have to wonder about that. And then in 27, she just kind of throws it right back at him. "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." What a brave woman. She flung it right back at him, and it just insists that, yeah, but the dogs would get to eat the crumbs, so why can't I have the crumbs? So Jesus had come to the chosen people of Israel, like God had promised. And this is really the fulfillment of the bigger promise that the Messiah would bring the whole world under God's reign. It's still in the future, but this is kind of pointing to that, right? So the Canaanite woman was determined to claim that broader promise ahead of time. I mean, the Jews hadn't even accepted what Jesus was doing. And here this Canaanite woman was. Our teacher says, if her daughter was to be saved, she needed the inbreaking of the kingdom right then and there. That reminds me, Josh preached at least